Okay, I am hitting start right now.
Hello and welcome to today's YouTube Live AMA, How to Drive Team Performance and Results with Viva Goals. We'll be talking to Jeff Kotz, Director of the Microsoft Channel Alliance at McChrystal Group and partner of Microsoft, as well as Kevin Cole, Implementation Program Manager at McChrystal Group. So both of these gentlemen have quite a bit of experience talking to leadership and teams about how to use Viva Goals to improve team performance and results and kind of transform organizations. So very lucky to have them here today. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions, please add them to the discussion below the video box on the event page in the community, and we'll be sure to get to them as we go along. Welcome, Jeff and Kevin. I would love if, starting with Jeff, you could tell us a little bit about your role, your organization, what your team is responsible for. Just give us a little background.
Can do. And thank you, Lucy, Brittany, Emily, everybody who's helped put this together, and everybody who's joined us today. Thank you all for being here today. Like Lucy said, my name is Jeff Kotz. I've been working with McChrystal Group for more than 10 years, half of that part-time, half of that full-time. I joined to join the analytics part of the business and have evolved that role to now partnering and being the chief point of contact with Microsoft for our partnership. What McChrystal Group does is we are a leadership and management consulting firm that helps organizations drive performance through the team of teams methodology that General McChrystal wrote about based on his experience in the Joint Special Operations Command and how that applies to business at large. Like I said, my role came through initially being on part of the analytics department, where I was introduced into workplace analytics, which is now Viva Insights. And this role has evolved from seeing Viva Insights and all the different Viva modules, and then really being our de facto subject matter expert on all of Viva. But that also, that experience led me to working with Viva Goals, because a lot of what we do, and you'll hear more about this over the course of the day, is helping organizations drive strategy alignment, and Viva Goals is a fantastic tool to help do that. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Toss it over to Kevin for introductions from you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Lucy. Great to be here. So I at McChrystal Group am focused on doing the things with our clients that Jeff just described. So whether that's developing, implementing new strategy, fixing performance issues, helping teams work better, introducing new tools to perform our roles more effectively. I lead the teams that execute that work with our clients. And so Viva Goals is increasingly becoming something that's top of mind for us and for our clients. So really excited to talk about some of the ways we're thinking about innovating how we do our work and how our clients are innovating the way they work today.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Jeff. So moving to our first question and just jumping right in here, how do consultants who are focused on people and process end up in the technology space with Viva Goals? Jeff, you touched on this a little bit in your intro, but how did this happen?
Yeah, appreciate that, Lucy. Yeah, so like I said, I started a lot with analytics and then got introduced into more tools. And for Viva Goals as it is now, we were having conversations with Ally.io before the acquisition, because we were always just looking for new tools to help do the processes that we do with organizations better, faster, more transparent, and so on. So we were familiar with the technology as a way to solve that sort of problem. But our business grew into the tech space during the pandemic, and Kevin was largely involved with some of the work we did with the Commonwealth of Virginia, helping them with a SharePoint migration, because at the time they were really an analog business, but we all became digital businesses a few years ago, and so helping to support them drive some of their success. Kevin, maybe you can tell us a bit more about your experience working and driving that digital transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we talked about people and process for many years, how we're going to adjust the way organizations are operating. And for a while, we tried to work around the technology that they had. But it became really during the pandemic impossible to ignore just how impactful the digital environment that our teams are operating in. And we'll talk about more of this as we go on in the conversation. But ultimately, as we try to train new behaviors into an organization, we want to reduce any friction to that change as much as possible. And it increasingly became apparent that we've got to be looking for tools that are going to reduce the friction away from the things that are going to be harder to do. So if we're going to have different conversations as an organization, as a team, if we're going to work and approach our customers differently, if we're going to transform the business, there's so many hard things wrapped up in that. And so how do we take the reporting, the management of data, the communication in a hybrid environment, and make those elements simpler, easier, reduce the mind share that those things take away, which is why we've leaned in so wholeheartedly with Microsoft in the last few years.
Yeah, and part of the reason we ended up working towards Ally.io and then eventually Viva Goals is this constant improvement. And Kevin's talking about reducing friction. All of the things that we see, or a lot of the things that we see there, were like existing solutions being too slow, and speed creates a friction point. Existing solutions lack transparency, and that is a large part about how you drive successful strategy implementation, is to increase visibility, as well as accountability. And a lot of the existing tools didn't have those things as well. So when you're going out and looking for a tool to help reduce friction between delivery and customer expectations, being able to highlight those things and find tools that expedite your ability to solve that, that's really what we were after when we started looking at the tech piece.
Yeah, and not to steal thunder from, I know maybe what's coming a little bit later, but something I love that Kevin mentioned in our prep call for this event was oftentimes bringing in new tooling is seen as a burden, right? As something that is kind of an additional lift for the team, and that Viva Goals really felt like more like the kind of way in to truly implementing these processes in a scalable way. So Kevin, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to touch on there as well, or we want to save that for later.
Yeah, we can touch on it quickly. Maybe implementing a new tool sounds like a burden until you tell folks you no longer have to submit this 15-page PowerPoint deck twice a week, and we're going to remove that part of your life. All of a sudden, people get interested. I also think the ability to participate in the strategic direction of the organization gets so many people excited, which is really why I love talking about this tool and how it makes that so much more realistic for large organizations.
Thank you. So moving to the next question, what should we know? And I think this kind of is a great segue to what you just said, but what should we know about how implementing strategy and goal alignment drive team performance? And what do customers learn from the experience, as you've been implementing or bringing Viva Goals into the conversation?
Sure. So what I would say is our clients who are doing the best right now are thinking this way. How do we get more of the organization thinking strategically? And to look at the big picture, what we talk a lot with our clients about is how are we going to get direction from the top very, very clearly, very efficiently to all of our teams, stakeholders in the organization, leadership 101 that is not so simple in a large, complex organization, and then empower those teams to make decisions of their own within a unified strategy. So in other words, you want to get very little in terms of decisions coming back, because that's ultimately what's going to slow you down. So information, yes. Progress, yes. Major issues, what we're learning, you want all that to be flowing in every direction of the organization. But increasingly, our highest performing customers are thinking, how do we eliminate the need for decisions to have to come back to the top of the organization? And so the Viva Goals implementation process, this tool is just such a huge step forward in facilitating this approach if it's done properly. We see, as far as learning goes, I think leaders learn a lot about the outcomes they really need to be focused on. Anyone who's dabbled with OKRs know it's a great model for really clarifying your intent as a leader. It's a great way to make language consistent across different parts of an organization, between different personalities. And I think teams learn not only how to articulate what they're trying to accomplish more clearly, they learn how to dialogue, build new muscles in how they work together. And then we see this more collaborative, dynamic environment start to appear. And really from a committed journey along this tool, I think you see conversations really start to elevate. And so while, yes, it's awesome for how much easier it is to capture, track, report, clarify strategic intent, get participation from the rest of the organization, where I see the biggest benefit is and I touched on this earlier, how it removes a lot of the friction and the mind share that goes into reporting and tracking and sharing of strategy, and creates space for teams to start to think differently about how they're communicating, lessons they're learning, and shift the conversation away from, what's happened, what do we need to update, to what do we need to get done, and where are we making progress, where are we not. So a bit rambly, but that's the beauty, I think, of a journey with Viva Goals is the way that it changes the types of conversations you can have as an organization.
I think there's a couple specific conversations that it does surface as well. One of the first things you mentioned, Kev, was decision making. And I know a lot of our customers come to us because they say they have problems with decision making. And a good decision is a decision that doesn't have to be remade. Now, granted, our operating environments are always changing. We're always getting new information. And retrospectively, that might change the way we think about the decision that we made previously. But if we are all on board with the decision that gets made and say, this is our objective and how we're going to measure it and be successful, that means the downstream effects of how are we tactically going to achieve that, and what initiatives do we need to put in place in order to make the decision that we made actualize in reality. That's one of the important muscles that you learn as part of this process, is getting better at making those decisions. And a lot of times that conflict resolution, anybody who's ever been in that context knows that conflict often arises when you don't have a shared definition of success. This is what I thought we were working towards. Well, this is what I thought we were working towards. These are my needs. These are my needs. And if you're competing at that level, you're not working together. So being able to have a transparent way to have a conversation about what is going to make us successful as an organization, and then base your decisions around a shared definition of success, mean that when you cascade down, again, anything tactically initiative related, you're moving in the same direction. And oftentimes that requires organizations to work together cross-functionally in ways that they otherwise wouldn't have. One of the things I see that we've that we're sharing now, this is one of the ways that we at McChrystal Group look at technology being layered onto the approach of our traditional model, working from the top of strategy, why do you exist as an organization, and working down to the execution level. And so where we start when we think about leveraging Viva Goals as a piece of technology, it's really starting with the raison d'etre for an organization. Why do you exist? And that's how you develop your company strategy. So as a tool, Viva Goals should live in that box and help us understand what are we trying to do and how do we know that we've been successful. Now, what this model also shows on the left and right-hand sides are the different bits of technology throughout the Viva suite and across the M365 environment that help feed in and make an organization successful at the technology level. Now, you can remove all of those tech pieces, but that's also going to slow you down as an organization. So if we start in the top left with why do you exist, you then need to create what we call an operating rhythm or a business rhythm of how do you communicate why you exist and how you define success down to an organization. And a good operating rhythm gets the right information to the right people at the right time. So what you're trying to do in that sense is communicate what success definition you've created through using Azure Active Directory, Entra ID, but getting those people's connections, communication pages to have only what's important for their definition of success. And then we move down through enabling success through a work hub, the M365 Office 365 environment, creating some execution based on that. Ultimately, all of those things that you produce end up in collateral within the knowledge infrastructure that you create at the bottom. Now, one of the core tenets of Team of Teams is that that information that you generate also feeds back up, and this is the right side of the model, feeds back up to help us understand what can we do better now that we have produced what our strategy said we should do. And so we work back up through means of visibility and employee listening using insights. You can work better if you have good knowledge management, and Copilot within SharePoint Online is a real good way to help surface the information that already exists. And ultimately, you want to be able to communicate back to leadership about how that strategy can be improved moving forward. And you can use tools like Engage, but Kevin mentioned this earlier, getting everybody involved in the formulation of a strategy of an organization is a way that goals can really be really effective in taking that ground bottom-up feedback from people who are executing the strategy to improve it at your quarterly or yearly review process.
Thanks, Jeff. And what I've heard, among all the other kind of nuggets of gold and what you two have shared for this question is Viva Goals kind of helps enable a smoother process among, in many of these categories that we're seeing on these slides, but it also helps answer these questions and helps almost, I don't want to say force, but bring to the forefront these conversations on leadership teams when they need to happen. So moving to the next question, and I think this is a nice segue, what do traditional methods of aligning strategy for team performance lack in your experience and with all the clients you've worked with? I know you've touched on a little bit of this.
Sure. I would say the biggest thing that I see wrong with traditional methods is they go on the shelf, so to speak. I think almost everybody's been in the corporate world, been in some semblance of a strategy session, a planning session. It may even go on for weeks and months. I see very few organizations who are able to take the output of an alignment process or a strategic planning process and carry that into a monthly, a weekly, a daily rhythm, which is what it really takes to actually execute, especially if you're driving significant change in the organization. So simply put, traditional methods don't result in enough conversation and a dynamic enough outcome to truly make an impact. I've got more, but I'll kick it to Jeff to see what's coming to mind.
Yeah, a couple of these things we've already touched on. One of the things I was talking about with communication is I think you mentioned this too, is your operating rhythm. So Viva Goals should help be the operating system as we think of an operating system, another piece of technology, operating system for your business. It's where your inputs come and your outputs come out, and everything we do for our strategy and our reason for existing should go through that. And for a lot of organizations who have a lot of momentum or inertia rather momentum in existing processes, saying we're going to change the way we do business, is uncomfortable. They're not used to it. They've done what they've done a certain way. So not using the technology also means you're not willing to change the way you communicate about what's important to the organization. So bad operating rhythm is one thing. Lacking formal feedback is another. And I think another big one is accountability. That when people say we're going to get this done, or it's this business unit's responsibility, or it's this team's, we can see that if you don't have specific individuals who are required on some cadence, weekly, monthly, however, to report how successful or not were they at meeting that goal, and then why or why not, doesn't allow senior leadership to remove blockers or enable them to be successful going forward. So accountability is not just about who do we punish when something doesn't go right. Accountability is about somebody being able to say, this is why it wasn't successful and what I need in order to be successful going forward. And when you implement this technology correctly, you are constantly asking and answering that question. So that's another thing I see. Kev, you got another one?
No, absolutely. Just sort of tying our 2 points together, what we advocate for is you go through this process of adopting, whether it's adopting OKRs or an alignment process that's going to culminate in adopting Viva Goals. The strategic outcomes that you define as an organization need to be the top of every meeting, or at least very early on, and become that framework for how everybody is thinking. Because really the second thing that I would say, coupled in with my first comments about method or issues with traditional methods of strategy alignment, is I don't think leaders always understand how much they need to invest in getting the critical concepts of the strategy to penetrate deep enough into the organization where the folks who will actually make it come to life can do anything about it, which is, again, this tool facilitates that process in a very structured way, and then sets you up for a place where we can beat the drum. We can discuss, clarify, communicate about what our mission is in simple, concise terms repeatedly, which is what it takes.
Yeah, I remember seeing this a lot earlier in my career. I'd be in a lot of executive meetings where leaders were very, very clear on what the priorities of the business were and what they were trying to accomplish and what success looked like. And that was great. But sitting there as a very junior member and in the capacity I was in those meetings as a fly on the wall, I would think to myself, no one else in the organization knows this. And I think you're right, there is this underestimation of how often you need to repeat and repeat and repeat, so it becomes a part of kind of the DNA of the organization. And the leaders don't have to be in every meeting saying, repeating, because it's just a part of that that rhythm. And I think having one source of truth where that lives, in addition to working this into business rituals at the cross-company level, we see as being really successful. Do you think, as part of sort of improving the operating rhythm, do you think that, having these set cadences and communication cadences that employees can rely on to understand, both what the goals are, what progress is, and then, how did we perform and what are we doing about it in the next business cycle? Is that kind of part of what you're talking about when you talk about improving an operating rhythm?
Yeah, absolutely. Having a structured cadence of conversations, as well as structured approach to those conversations, we believe is just incredibly important, because the consistency is what helps everybody lock in, and in most cases, groups of people need time, they need reps to familiarize with how they're going to work together, how they're going to communicate, especially when we're talking about strategy and the big ticket items for the organization that have a lot of emotion maybe wrapped up in them. You get into resource sharing, or just more simply, like you're talking about, Lucy, where folks just understand things differently. And so to take that back, if we say we're going to once a week, we're going to talk with everybody about what the mission is, how we're doing against that mission, what the critical initiatives are to achieving those objectives. And our most senior folks in the team are going to be very vulnerable. They're going to unpack their logic. They're going to ask questions maybe they know the answer to, but that they assume some folks in the organization may not. And they reduce the activity that goes into preparing and making a beautiful meeting happen and say, we're going to have a more messy conversation. It's going to have structure, but it's going to be real. And we're going to use this tool to help us carry all the data and reporting forward and make it usable after the conversation. That's where you start to really see an organization change. You see the culture start to shift. And to my points earlier, you start to create this confidence in the different parts of the organization, especially around maybe specialized team members, where they understand what the organization is trying to do, and they feel empowered to make faster decisions, to innovate. And so some really beautiful things start to unfold.
Yeah, I think then you also avoid a lot of the messier or harder conversations later, where there is that very much heads down, kind of specialized, especially for, highly specialized folks approach that doesn't kind of pop up enough to say, well, why are we doing this? And so maybe I should think of a different way to innovate this or make this better or question why we're doing it. And then, kind of come to a better result at the end of the day. Jeff, I saw you kind of motioning. Is there something you wanted to add there to what Kevin said?
Yeah. I think we talk about having tough conversations, and not all conflict is bad, and sometimes we disagree. But one of the things that makes it easier to have a hard conversation is trust. And one of the ways you establish trust in an organization is through reliability. So if you create a cadence where these are the rules, this is when we're going to communicate, these are the things that we agree we're going to talk about, then it's okay for me to share what I know and what I've done. And this also is in the context of sort of what I say and what I report on, because your activity and your productivity are not always the same thing. So if you are just reporting up in a meeting and saying, this is the activity that I've done, quote unquote, towards the goal of the past week or the past month, people may argue that you're not doing the right things, or why did you spend your time on that? Or how is that supposed to help us achieve our broader organizational goal? But if you know that it's a safe space to have a tough conversation, you're more likely to say, I wasn't able to achieve some things that I intended to do, but I now have a plan to move forward on it. And you don't have to be raising these issues as soon as they come up, and it becomes a fire drill every time something doesn't happen when you think it should or the way you think it should. You're going to have the opportunity to report to certain people at a certain time about the right productivity-based conversations. And if you have to share some bad news, it's in the context of improving the organization and moving us together forward towards whatever shared goal we already have. So that structure really provides a lot of psychological safety for people who may be, having to report, I didn't hit my goal, or I didn't get this thing done. So it's not just about reporting up your activity, it's about doing it in a structured, safe way so that you can do better next time.
Yeah, we talk to customers a lot about this, and just the growth mindset as being very, very critical to this. And again, I've heard, I think both of you say, this should not be a punitive approach, right? It should be, here's the data, here's the impact, here's what we learned, and here's how we're going to carry that forward into the next cycle. And I think something you also just touched on a bit there is, if there's clarity from the very beginning about what the goals are, and those hard conversations have happened up front, and that healthy debate has happened at the very beginning of the business cycle, then you're not going to hopefully get to a point, even if you have to pivot your tactics and your initiatives to meet that goal, you're hopefully not going to get to a point within, mid business cycle when you're reporting that is totally misaligned with the goals of the business, right? Because you've had the hard conversations of like, okay, well, we can only prioritize 3 out of these 10 things. What are we going to do? And I think that also creates some of the safety that you're talking about there.
Yeah, and Kevin mentioned getting reps in, get your repetitions, and we'd be fooling ourselves to say we only have the hard conversations once. You're constantly trying to readjust. What is our strategy? What are our tactics? And the more you have those conversations, better. You get better at that particular type of conversation, whether it's defining what success looks like and knowing that you have to disagree on some things, but ultimately, come to a decision about where we're moving forward, but also that you have the opportunity to change that going forward. Based on what we knew now, this is the decision that we made and the course we set. But we're reviewing this 3 months later. We've closed out some things. They weren't as successful as we thought. We have the opportunity to change directions based on the new information that we have. And that's the part of the growth mindset, Lucy, I think you're referring to.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think that's a good way to close off this question and move to our next, which is, how is Viva Goals different from other products that you've used for driving team alignment and performance?
I'm happy to hop in first, and I'll toss to you, Kevin, for your perspective. I think the traditional methods and traditional technology would be things like Slideware, PowerPoint, Excel. This is just, I just have a list of things that I think we need to accomplish in order to be successful. Goals is purpose-built. Goals provides structure, provides transparency, whereas some of those other methods of once a week, we're all going to share slides together, so I need to spend X amount of hours preparing my slides that we're all going to put together. Not being purpose-built, it's like duct tape. It's really flexible. PowerPoint and Excel and other tools allow you to say whatever you want and justify your existence and say, this was my activity. But when you force it into the context of this is what we decided was going to help us succeed as an organization, you're always reporting against that particular structured element. That reduces, I think, the complexity of having to say, these are all the different things I did. You're only then reporting up on the actions specific to the goal that you've outlined. And we were just talking about how important structure is for things like psychological safety and having tough conversations. But that structure is really the key to help make this more successful than the other, again, really flexible technologies. And we didn't have that. But now that we do, we should start thinking more intentionally about using the right tool for the right job.
Great, thank you.
And I'll pile on a little bit. There's an element of this tool that in that it has the built-in guardrails that not only help your thinking along in a way that I think other tools, the ones Jeff mentioned, don't, but really advance the ability for you and the team to speak the same language, which is really, really important. And just having that built into the tool, no one has to play policeman. We're using this size font, we're using this many words, or we're describing what we want to achieve in these terms. Just having that taken care of is massive. And then some of the more advanced pieces of functionality where you can automate the data feeds to update your progress and so forth, I think they start to prompt other questions like, do we really have a great data set underneath our business? Is the system of record that I'm tying into the right one? How good are we at quantifying what we want to achieve? Or is that something that, we really need to spend some time on to perform strategically at a higher level? So Word documents that have beautiful statements about what you're going to do, PowerPoints that are great looking. I think give you a little bit more wiggle room to be less accountable to what you need to accomplish. So that's one thing I personally experienced going through this, and have seen lots of others make similar comments.
Yeah, you can wiggle your way out of it with all that flexibility. And another thing you're talking about in there about the automated data feeds, I think that's another good point of you can start bringing in whatever information you want if it tells the story the way you want to, but presuming it's set up in a way that things like I don't know, planner or dynamics or stuff from the finance and sales team that are automatically updated into your numbers, I don't have to worry that when Kevin tells me he generated $2 million in revenue, that he's making that up, or where does that number come from, or what is it all about. I know that it's been designed in a way that his numbers are agreed upon to be true, and then if we need to take some action on it, we have that. And then again, the wiggle room and flexibility of other tools is almost a detriment to there being success in this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking recently to a CMO at one of our, at a company that is our customer, and he said that when he saw Viva Goals really kind of stick in the organization, it was when there was kind of a mandate from the leadership level that just said, we will not be using PowerPoint anymore. Not to hate on PowerPoint, it's an amazing tool in so many ways. And actually, Viva Goals has a great export to PowerPoint functionality for leaders who feel more, comfortable in that space, which many do. But only when it was made very clear across the organization that Viva Goals is your source of truth for presenting. You can use the review dashboards to share your progress summaries. Like this will be where we are operating from. So like, don't bring your PowerPoint to the meeting to show us your goal progress and results like that. We're not going to look at that. We're going to just go into Viva Goals. So if you haven't checked in, or you haven't, gotten your team members to check in, or your data sources aren't connected properly for your department or business unit, right? Like you won't have much to present then, right? But that, kind of just like very clear direction, I guess, allowed all of the leadership and business units to start, like you're saying, speaking the same language and operating from the same space. And I think that, they're seeing now like a lot of saved time because, while they have to craft the progress summaries, which by the way will get much easier with Copilot and Viva Goals because it will essentially do that for you. The data is all there. And so there's also less time that leaders spend pinging different team members within their business units and saying, hey, can you link me to that Power BI report again? Can I get these numbers? And I think also that takes the load off of many employees, including many specialists who are often the recipients of those, last minute pings about, hey, can I get access to, this report? I need these numbers now, the meeting's tomorrow kind of thing. So just those are kind of underlining a few of the points that you've both.
The shared point of truth is huge. But we also saw this with a customer when we were helping them set some stuff up. They wanted to measure ROI on a certain initiative, and one of their inputs to ROI was time savings. And as we were building out the structure for this, we realized that collecting that data, that their pre-number, their initial baseline number, was just a bunch of guesses, and that they didn't actually have a tracking system in place, because we're like, if we're going to calculate a delta for time saved here, you need to have some input mechanism in here. So when it's like making sure that everybody reports back how much time they spent doing X after the initiative, we're like, well, we never had them report with the initial one. What was that? Oh, it was just a bunch of SMEs taking guesses, but not actually reported data. You start to surface when when you're super intentional about what you're measuring and how you're measuring it, because you need your KRs to be measurable, obviously. you start to uncover places where maybe people were lazy about the process, and you need to make sure that about the process of not inputting into goals, but about the thing that they're trying to accomplish. You surface those things here. And again, forcing people into a certain structure, call it forcing, but I mean, that structure and discipline is real important, but forcing people into that structure is pretty valuable just to surface those challenges.
Yeah, thank you. That's I think puts a nice bow on it. And so, I mean, we've started giving examples, and I find that these are often the most useful for folks who attend these events. But do you have any examples, any more examples of how the process of implementing Viva Goals drives performance? Because to build off of, Jeff, what you were just saying, I think there's the creating the discipline in the organization, that this will be, whether it's at the team level, department level, or at the whole org level, that this is what we're using. This is our system. But I think it's also making sure that leaders, employees, managers all are aware of the benefit that they're going to see as well, and how that's going to drive performance forward, not just, hey, this is a new process and kind of get on board or else. But I would love to hear, yes, do you have any examples of how the process of implementing Viva Goals drives performance?
Want to take a first stab, Jeff?
Yes, please.
Sure. So, we've kind of skirted around how this is a great catalyst or complement to change. So what I think we see a lot of success with a tool like this is, can you tie it to something critical and new for the business? So example that comes to mind for me is, everybody's thinking about what does AI mean for our business right now. We've seen a client who, they said, you know what, we're going to pilot Viva Goals around this really critical question: what does AI mean for our business? And as a senior leader, we're thinking, this technology has a chance to make our customers happier, make our processes faster, make us help us save some costs, get our humans working on more creative tasks, a more engaged workforce, the laundry list of big, bright ideas. If we're going to just lay out those outcomes, and then I'm going to look to the team to tell me how we get there, and we're going to do it in the context of adopting this new method. We're going to write OKRs, and we're going to use this tool, Viva Goals. And where we've seen clients in a matter of days go from having no real hard idea about how they're going to tackle something as big and hairy as AI to having some very tangible outcomes they think they can achieve that are boiled down into clear results, initiatives. The owners of those initiatives have actually defined what they are. And we've gone from having no familiarity with OKRs or with Viva Goals or a clear roadmap about how we're going to apply AI to the business to having all of that, being ready to step into, okay, now we're going to execute, and we're going to talk, and we're going to adapt this strategy, in a matter of weeks. So whatever your process ends up being, how fast you want to go, I would say trying to tie a pilot to something critical to the business, and not trying to be perfect, but what are some no questions outcomes that we need to deliver, and let's start breaking it down as a team. Tell me how we're going to get there.
Yeah, and that's the conversation I've had with a COO before, was this sort of back and forth dialogue, and I'll abbreviate it for the nature of this context, which was, I don't know how to get my people to do more, he says. So what are you asking them to do? And if you then start, so this is early on in his adoption of the OKR process, and you see you can, and there's some flexibility within Viva Goals to assign multiple owners to a particular objective. But there's a phrase that we use at McChrystal Group, is if everybody's assigned to feed the dog doesn't get fed. It's diffusion of responsibility, if you will. So having this conversation of, well, what are you asking them to do? are you asking them all to do the same thing? Well, no, but yes, they all need to create more revenue because revenue is our goal. We need to drive more revenue. But knowing that they manage different business units, are you asking them all just to do more of the same thing that they're already doing? Or what constitutes good performance for this person or that person? And so just this process of surfacing to leaders who think they're doing enough and think that their behaviors are just not being met by the people down the line, it just surfaces to them about how you really need to start defining productivity for specific different groups of people, and then come back and say, well, how close are you to meeting that particular goal? But really this process of implementing goals or doing strategy alignment, it can be a way for people who are successful and confident and maybe full of hubris because they've been successful by way of their confidence, a visible piece of fact that you can say, I'm not just arguing with you, I'm just saying, look at the way we presented the information that we have in this tool and argue with it. You're not arguing with me and I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying, based on the way you have things input into this technology, how are you defining performance for them? And if it's not laid out as initiatives they can accomplish, you're not going to be able to tell them just to do more. You need to tell them what to do.
That's great. That's great. I love your quote from your little soundbite from earlier around, if everyone's feeding the dog never gets fed. I'm going to start incorporating that, I think, in my personal and professional life. Kevin, anything you want to add before we go to our next question?
No, we're good to move on.
Okay, great. So wrapping up here with a couple last questions. I want to touch on, how do you measure ROI for technology like Viva Goals? This is a question we get asked a lot from customers, and so would love to hear your perspective here. And then after this question, we'll wrap with just kind of what are some quick tactical tips, practical and tactical tips that folks can take from this event. But let's start with, how do you measure ROI for technology like goals?
Well, I'm going to take a stab, and then Kevin, maybe you got some thoughts too. I think again, this uncovers a pretty big question to a lot of organizations, which is, if they expect the ROI to be productivity, it's a productivity tool. You ask the question, well, how are you currently measuring productivity? That's not to be combative or like a smart aleck or anything, but let's put this in the language of what's important to you. And to the degree they can or can't articulate that allows you to then measure the change here. But I think what ends up happening is the expectation is that because we're using this, our ultimate goal is to make money. That's what all companies, in effect, want to do. Most companies, we're not here to just be benevolent. We want to make money. And they say, well, I'm going to look at my revenue now based on where it was a year ago, because the thing I want to do is want to get more money. But I think that's the wrong way to go about trying to measure ROI here. So defining it backwards by what it's not. I think if you have a poorly defined process for how your business generates revenue, but also you can translate to whatever that bigger, broader goal is. But if you don't have a good process in place a well-defined process in place for how you achieve your goal, you're not going to be able to measure the impact on the process itself. So what do I mean by that? I think, like, if you are an author and you write books, you have certain steps that you take in order to write these books. And then once these books are written, do you promote them? Do you sell them? So there's a couple of steps you have to take in order to make money as an author. But the author's goal is not to make money. The author knows, I have to create a draft, I have to edit it, I have to publish it and promote it, and only then can I say I have achieved my goal of revenue. So when organizations say my ROI should simply be a revenue number, then I don't really know that you understand how your organization works. And so this tool and any strategy alignment process is really supposed to uncover how your organization works and then improve on those processes that are in place. So if the first thing you can measure is, have we unpacked how our business works? That's pretty good ROI from the start. It's just having a better understanding of what it takes to succeed in your business. And again, that goes back to having shared definitions of success and the tough conversations it takes to get there. So I think a big part is helping you understand the way your organization works and then improving on those processes. Because incrementally, if you improve all those processes, provided you define success correctly, your organization will ladder up and build together. Last little anecdote and pass it over to Kevin. A bit of this is also like, if you've ever heard the story of the walk up to a guy and he's building bricks and he's laying bricks in front of a big construction site, and you ask that person, what are you doing? Some people say I'm just laying bricks, but other people might say, I'm building a palace. And so to the extent that someone understands what I'm doing is important, and that creates engagement throughout the transparency and visibility of the tool, you're able to measure the return by saying, my people know that what they do matters. They know that every brick I lay is helping us get one step closer to building a palace. But if you don't have good processes in place, that person only knows that they're laying bricks and they don't feel the extra need to drive more value for the organization. So it's an engagement lever, it's a transparency lever. But I think ROI is a tricky one, but it's really about improving process. Jeff?
Love that story. So I've got two things in mind that I think types of return that I would be trying to get from this tool. The first is, this is really a tool in my mind for leaders, organizations that want to get big things done and want to create a dynamic, nimble team that's going to operate at a high level, in this digital age. We've talked at length about all the ways it starts to get you there. But number one, as far as return, I would directly link to your strategic outcomes and whether or not you're able to deliver them. Number two is in terms of talent. And so what I would personally want to do with this tool is ahead of implementation, get a baseline of how bought in our team is to the strategy. You can do this with employee listening, with some pulse surveys. How well do people understand the way that their work contributes to overall mission success? And then I would continue to check that every 6 months to see if that needle is moving. Because ultimately, if the people on the ground who are really carrying out your strategy don't understand the strategy, it's only going to be so effective. And that's the number one thing that I would be trying to move with this tool.
I'll add one more bit on ROI and then Lucy, create that space for you. The whole point of building a digital infrastructure for your organization, say not the whole point, but a big point is to actually get this, the ability to use this tool is the yield, is the return. Because if you have the good digital infrastructure in place, then this process of implementing Viva Goals, reporting into it, creating automations for some of your reporting, and so on, your ability to use this technology is a consequence of investing in creating the good M365 infrastructure. You have Teams now. What does having Teams now allow you to do? What does having good SharePoint knowledge management allow you to do? It allows you to use a tool such as Viva Goals to provide you transparency and accountability in your business processes. So if you're always looking for what's the return on this investment of investing in Viva Goals and the process of implementing it, if you're always looking for what's the value of that, sometimes you forget that's actually, it's the yield of all of that hard work you've done for your own infrastructure.
I love that. I love closing this question on that, because it is truly, once you have Teams, you have sort of this foundational infrastructure, and the rest, and M365, you can then plug in all the different Viva components, not just Viva Goals, and they start to speak to and inform each other. So Viva Insights is telling you about the like productivity and sentiment of your team. You're using Pulse or Glint to actually ask employees, how is this process going for you? What does your satisfaction look like on a regular basis? And you're using goals as kind of that source of truth, and engage as your communication mechanism throughout the organization. Just to use a few examples of parts of the Viva suite. So I think really important point there. And I think, there's the ROI of Viva Goals just as a tool, as we've been talking about for most of this event, but also how it fits in to the rest of what you could also call just an operating system for your business and employee base, really, which is Viva. So I want to close just on some practical, we always like to close on practical tips and actions our audience can take to drive alignment and performance, based on conversations you've had with leaders and teams, what you've observed, implementations that you've run, what should those watching kind of think about or do today?
Two short answers. One, make sure everybody's work matters. And that's a good way to know whether or not you've got completeness to your implementation. So if I don't know why I'm laying that brick, that I'm building that palace, then I don't know why my work matters. I'm not going to be engaged. I'm not going to have a high performance. And the second one is really tactical once you get into the process of people are going to want to remove things that are not going to be completed as a reflection of, oh, now in mid-quarter or something like that, we say we're not going to be able to achieve that goal. We should remove it. But that's really antithetical to the program being successful. When you get to the completing the check-ins, and you get to closing out an OKR, being able to say, we didn't accomplish this, why, and what we can do better to make sure we achieve it next time, that's really key. So don't let people remove things just because they're not going to be successful for the quarter. You have to see the process through to the end.
Awesome. My one piece of advice is perfect is the enemy of progress in this situation. I would just absolutely recommend any teams considering this tool, just dive in, start using it, start playing with it. And as far as translating your strategy into this tool, again, don't try to be perfect. Focus on the most critical things, have the conversations, don't be afraid to make tweaks, adjustments. And when you're doing your retrospectives or your after action reviews, whatever they are, that's the time to say, what did we learn? How can we do this better next time? Treat it as a journey. But the last thing you want is for this to be an exercise in how much time can we spend writing OKRs.
Thank you. That's great. And I think we've seen a lot of customers have success with this sort of also grassroots adoption across the org and on a team by team basis. So, there's definitely that top-down approach that is very successful where, comes from the very highest echelons of leadership. But we've also seen teams more take the approach of, hey, let's get in, let's play and experiment, and then kind of just see how that works on our team. So many different ways to, I think, get to the same summit, so to speak. I want to thank both of you. I think we're at time for joining us today, and everybody who's able to join live or who attended, who's watching after the fact. We have a couple ways that you can engage with us next. First is register for our next event in the Viva Goals community. This is tomorrow, I believe. Viva Goals office hours, 3 ways to improve your goal management process with Copilot and Viva Goals. And this will talk a lot about how to use Copilot and Viva Goals to make many of the pieces of your goal management and goal setting process even more kind of seamless, efficient, and clear for your team. And then if you're not a Viva Goals customer yet, definitely sign up for a free 60-day trial. And both of these QR codes should work on your screen. So just point your phone at them. And connect with Jeff and Kevin on LinkedIn. Again, these QR codes should take you right to their LinkedIn profiles where you can connect with them, and also DM them with any follow-up questions you may have, or areas where you might need some guidance and advice as you think about improving your own goal management and goal setting process. So with that, Jeff and Kevin, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks, everybody.